Okay, we are live. I'm gonna start letting people in.
So unmuting and my volume down.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah, why was it echoing again, Angela?
Because your volume, because
Is my volume on?
yeah,
Oh, sorry. Did I do that by accident? Okay.
if you mute or unmute and
Oh, no, there's still more.
okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone. We're just waiting as folks come through before we get started. Give them a couple minutes. More folks are streaming through. I think we'll give folks 11:05 and then we'll get officially started before we're still streaming in. This is also going to be available. It's also playing on our YouTube channel. So you can share that with folks too for people in the Zoom room. Give folks 1 more minute.
Lena, are you outside?
Sitting in my patio in Berkeley, California.
Patio. Wow.
Thanks to everyone for joining. We have a slight tech issue and are just fixing that, and then we're gonna start the conversation.
Okay, let's officially get started. Hi, everyone. My name is Melanie Elvena. I am the artistic director. Oh, sorry. One second. Sorry, we're like in the Zoom space. Sorry. Once again, my name is Melanie Elvena. I'm the artistic director of the Asian Pacific Islander Cultural Center. And our mission is to promote and present art that is reflective of the unique experiences of Asian and Pacific Islanders living in the United States. We are here online today for our event Hidden Histories, Radical Reimaginings, Chinatowns of the Past and Present, which is produced by Lena Chen, who is here. We have artists, we have folks here in the Bay Area as well as in Pittsburgh. So welcome everybody. And joining us here with me today is my festival intern, Angelo. He is helping with today's event. So thank you, Angelo. But before we get started, I just want to say this is part of APIC's annual United States of Asian America Festival. And where we present over 20 programs reflecting the artistic accomplishments and cultural diversity of San Francisco AAPI communities. USOF showcases artists representing a diverse range of ethnic and cultural groups and aims to heighten the visibility of AAPI artists working in all disciplines: theater, music, dance, film, literature, visual arts, and many, many more. Our goal is to nurture and empower these groups to be self-sufficient while providing the support they need to grow. The festival and this event would also not be possible without our funders: San Francisco Grants for the Arts, San Francisco Arts Commission, San Francisco Office of Economic and Workforce Development, California Arts Council, and Zeller Block Family Foundation. Also, just a quick advocacy message: if you like today's program, please email your city supervisors or whoever is in your local area and urge them to continue supporting and funding AAPI art and artists. Yeah, and if you don't live in San Francisco, but are in the Bay Area, you can always, APIC is located in District 6, so you can always email the District 6 supervisor as well. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Lena, who will intro the program.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to have this group of audience members from both sides of the country talking about these stories that are very much interconnected, but I don't think very visible, but are becoming of increasing interest to so many folks who have a personal tie to Chinese migration, as well as those who live in the places where there have been vibrant members of this community. Before we begin with the presentations today, I want to give a brief land acknowledgement. So Pittsburgh occupies the ancestral and unceded lands of the Haudenosaunee, Lenape, Osage, and Shawnee peoples. And Berkeley, California, where I'm based now, occupies the territory of the Huchun, the ancestral and unceded land of the Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone people. And I want to recognize the cultural importance of land and the role of cultural institutions like APIC and various cultural initiatives like the ones I've been involved in the formation of collective memory around the land. I want to recognize that everyone living on these lands today has benefited and continues to benefit from the use and occupation of this land, and that displacement and erasure are not just histories for Native peoples. So land acknowledgements like this one are exercises in preservation and reconciliation that are engaged with the past, present, and future. And by offering this acknowledgement, I affirm Indigenous sovereignty and the need to be accountable to American Indian and Indigenous people. I have with me today Shirley Yi, who is the daughter of Yuan Yi, the subject of the short documentary we're about to show. We also have with us Professor Lok Su from UC Berkeley, who's also the director of the Asian American Research Center there, as well as her students, Harrington Fan and Ava Olson, who are going to be presenting parts of their research from their Radical SF Chinatown Digital Humanities Project. So just so folks know, the format will be a short screening of the short documentary, followed by a brief conversation between me and Shirley. Then we're going to show the Radical San Francisco Digital Humanities Project, along with some presentations from Harrington and Ava. And then all of us will take part in a group Q&A You are welcome to drop your questions into the chat at any point during this event, and we'll try to get to all of them by the end. Um, and yeah, have I left anything out, Melanie? Okay, cool. Then I am going to share this video and cross my fingers that all the tech works out.
What we know today as downtown Pittsburgh was once the home to a thriving Chinese community. Springing up in the late 1800s, Chinatown consisted of Water Street, Grant Street, Ross Street, and 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Ave. The area was populated by Chinese laborers, most of them men who came from the Toishan County of Canton Province. They found jobs as merchants, laundrymen, restaurant owners, and factory workers. 2nd Avenue was known as the Chinese Wall Street because of the money that immigrant workers sent back to China. Fraternal organizations like the Ong Leong and Hip Sing Tongs supported the newcomers as they made their home in Chinatown. They introduced them to potential employers, settled disputes between them, and protected them from discrimination. On Sundays, the tired old bachelors converged in Chinatown. For laundrymen, Sundays were a day of relief from boiling soapy cauldrons of dirty clothes and lifting gas-fired 6-pound irons. The central gathering point was the Chinese grocery store, Chinatowns, at 520 3rd Avenue. The store was stocked with Chinese goods ranging from groceries to laundry and restaurant supplies. Workers without permanent addresses also received their mail there. Prominent Tong officials and common laundrymen all gathered at Chinatown to drink tea, discuss current events, and play friendly games of mahjong. My father, Toi Yi, arrived in Pittsburgh from China in 1919. He was able to immigrate despite the Chinese Exclusion Act because he had secured a visa as a merchant. In the 1920s, the newly constructed Boulevard of the Allies displaced many residents to other neighborhoods and nearby towns. My mother and I arrived from Canton in 1930. I was the eldest of my siblings and the only one to be born in China. Chinatown was then comprised of 16 businesses in mixed-use buildings with shops downstairs and living spaces for the shopkeeper and lodgers upstairs. My father rented 529 2nd Avenue. It once housed a Chinese restaurant that had gone bankrupt like so many businesses lost to the Great Depression. There were 2 storefronts on the 1st floor with completely empty 2nd and 3rd floors. As a tax-delinquent property owned by the city, it became home to our family, the last Chinese family to settle in an already dwindling Chinatown. My father Toi was an experienced cook who had honed his skills by catering banquets in Canton. In Pittsburgh, he found work as a cook at Chinatown. Upstairs, a dozen elder Chinese bachelors lived in dormitory-style quarters. Each day, they came down to a dinner prepared by my father. During the Depression, the number of tables expanded to accommodate visitors from outside Chinatown. No one was ever turned away for lack of funds. Chinese residents never received city aid because the community took care of its own people. Cooking at the Chinatown kept my father busy for 5 days a week. But in 1933, he decided to start an additional venture to cater to laundrymen on Sundays. For $3 a month, he rented the basement of Sung Winqing, a former Chinese grocery store at 523 2nd Avenue. On Sunday mornings, he posted handwritten menus on a wall listing 3 kinds of congis, tripe, hog maw, or pork innards for 35 cents a bowl. He also offered a variety of dim sum. As the business grew, he added dishes like lean pork, fillet of fish, and congee with 1,000-year egg. Diners also ordered the beef chalfun, made with mother's homemade rice noodles. Father was a waiter, cook, cashier, and dishwasher. Since my mother was caring for my newborn sister, I bussed the tables as a 9-year-old. We opened at 11 a.m., and by mid-afternoon, we sold out of food. The tiny eatery started with no name, but by word of mouth, it became known as Toy's Place. I graduated from Connolly Vocational High School in 1943 and Fifth Avenue High School in 1944. After enrolling at the University of Pittsburgh, I left to enlist in the U.S. Army Air Corps, where I was honorably discharged in 1946. Now a citizen, I was able to return to China to get married in 1947. The following year, my wife Betty and I welcomed our first child. By then, I had been apprenticing with the Onglyon Merchants Association as the assistant to the secretary, Billy Yacht, who was Chinatown's unofficial mayor. The Onglyon Merchants Association's majestic headquarters stood at 522 3rd Avenue, next door to Kwangyi-tong. It was constructed in 1922 with a tall pagoda-style roof and lead windows. On the 3rd floor, visitors walked through gilded archways into a room furnished with teakwood imperial-style chairs and matching tea tables. There were carved tables embellished with mother-of-pearl and silk-embroidered hangings. A huge antique bronze incense holder stood in front of a carved altar. Long tables were set for meetings of the Onglyon officials. All community disputes were amicably settled in this ornate chamber where the aroma of sandalwood wafted through the air. In 1946, the Kwangyi-tong, the general store, was reopened as the Chinatown Inn. I worked there from 1948 until 1951. That year, my father and I bought out a restaurant at 124 6th Avenue and renamed it the Young Toy Restaurant, which meant American Luck. My mother directed the kitchen, where she made filling for egg rolls and dumplings. Featuring both a Chinese and American menu, Young Toy was open from 11 a.m. to 1 a.m., 7 days a week, including holidays. The restaurant was like our second home. Every family member worked all day, though I took a couple hours off to care for my young children, Lois and John. In 1954, we had a big birthday party for my father. Later that year, Betty gave birth to our youngest daughter, Shirley. In 1961, the unofficial mayor of Chinatown, Billy Yacht, passed away. He was my role model and mentor, who translated between city officials and residents who only spoke Chinese. I inherited his role as a new secretary of the Onglyon Merchants Association, becoming the official spokesman and honorary mayor of Chinatown. Every Chinese Lunar New Year, journalists interviewed me about the holiday foods and traditions. I even appeared as a guest on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood to share a Chinese cooking demonstration. As mayor, my most important duty was caring for 15 elderly residents, former laundrymen who spoke little English and lived in the Onglyon Merchants Association, which had been converted into a charity retirement home in 1967. Despite diminishing membership and revenues, Onglyon remained committed to serving its community. But by the 1980s, older members passed away and new Chinese immigrants came speaking different dialects. Many were college educated. Some came for work opportunities, and others created their businesses. They settled in other neighborhoods far from what was left of Chinatown. I retired, and a spokesman was no longer needed to represent Chinatown. In 1990, the Ongliong Association building was officially sold to the Su Lim Yi family, owners of the Chinatown Inn restaurant. Today, the restaurant and its buildings remain as the last vestige of a once vibrant cultural community established more than 100 years ago.
Dear Dad, you would be so proud to see how the Chinese community in Pittsburgh has evolved. I feel lucky to be the daughter of Yuan Yi, the last mayor of Chinatown. Growing up, I saw how much you loved the city and how you wanted others to learn about the history and contributions of the Chinese people. You supported Chinese residents with English translation, business referrals, and bookkeeping for their restaurants. You helped friends with immigration issues, you mentored new immigrants, you cared for aging ones, and even ran for city council. Today, more than ever, the spirit of your legacy is flourishing. Asian American Pacific Islanders in Pittsburgh celebrate kinship and support each other after tragedy. We gather for cultural festivals, we organize brunches, and we throw parties. Today, there are more than a dozen Chinese restaurants in Squirrel Hill, a neighborhood filled with Asian businesses and residents. In 2022, a Pennsylvania historical marker was erected at the old site of Chinatown, and on the day of its unveiling, I led a walking tour through 2nd and 3rd Avenue. A crowd of 100 people came out in the rain to learn about this little-known history, and I used your map as a guide to share memories from when you lived there in the 1930s. I've kept all your photos and artifacts. I have boxes of stories that you wrote by hand after your stroke when you taught yourself to write again. I'm slowly editing your words, which you hoped would help your grandchildren understand your life. And someday, I will fulfill your dream of publishing them as a book. Thank you for serving as mayor of Pittsburgh's Chinatown, for representing and supporting the community. Thank you for taking the time to document these histories so they're not forgotten. And most of all, thank you for being my Baba. Your daughter, Shirley.
Thank you, Lena.
Thank you so much for joining us. It's very exciting to have this project out into the world. And there are many people in the audience today who've made it possible, who are featured in the film actually, and some of the documentation we shared in those photographs, who have had a chance to spend time with me and with Shirley in Shirley's home and going on that tour of Chinatown with Shirley last year. I mean, it seems like, or 2 years ago? I don't know. It seems like so long ago. um, but yeah, I wanted to just spend a few minutes giving Shirley a chance to talk about how she's come to amass this huge collection of archives that was in the possession of her father, and how she's kind of shepherded this, and where we're at now with the archive and its future. So I'm going to give Shirley a chance to speak.
Hello, everyone. Hi. So as you can see by the film, there's a lot of pieces of paper that you saw there, but many more that I have around me from all the documentation that everything that my father had collected and saved since he began photographing happenings in Chinatown in the 1940s. Using this cute little camera here. And so I inherited all this stuff when he passed away in 2008, but I have many documents and photographs that he had saved, and now I have them. For example, like the map that you saw in the film, and that's how he wrote his stories. So he wrote many stories about his boyhood and his interactions with shopkeepers in Chinatown, and people he met and conversations he had. So that's why I have much of the history, because he wrote it down and took a lot of photographs and saved a lot of them. And one of them, this is a really cute photo of the Pittsburgh Chinese church, the Mission Church, and from 1940. So I see my aunts in the photograph, and my father probably took this photograph himself, so that's why he's not in it. But so he's in this one.
Can you hold it up a little closer to
Yeah.
the,
Cute, huh? Then he's in this class picture, 1939, of his grade school. And he wrote a story about his grade school adventures, making friends. And so in 1939, when he graduated from grade school and went to high school, then his father, my grandfather, then sent my father to work for his friend who had a laundry just outside of downtown. And my father then worked at the laundry, leaving his home in Chinatown, but he lived in Chinatown, but then worked at the laundry 5 days of the week. So just coming back to his home in Chinatown on weekends. But so he worked after school, after high school each day, ironing, and he kept this 6-pound iron as a souvenir. But he wrote a lengthy story about his experiences working at the laundry. And so he wrote many stories, and like the church photo, there's many more photos of years after, because then the church moved to the Salvation Army across the street. But this one is from 1959 at a church picnic. And it's me and my mom and my sister and my grandmother and the ladies who started the church, Mrs. Shaw and Mabel Valetsky. So I have lots of photos of the early church days. And this one's kind of fun too. And from 1954, the Chinese mission Christmas party. So yeah, so many photographs and documents, but like the Only Young Merchants Association. So photographs that my father took of the exterior and the interior of the building, because it was really fabulous, really beautiful inside, very ornate. And he returned in 1946 when he was in the service to photograph the convention that had come to the city. So all these little photographs he took for the 1946 National Convention that came to Pittsburgh. So there was many conventions. There was 3 actually national conventions that came to Pittsburgh, but he photographed all of them, and it was a really big deal in our house, the national convention. So, and I love these curly edge photographs, 1959. So interior and exterior photographs and speakers, and then 1972. And then he even saved the telegrams from people who were invited to the convention, but they didn't come. So, or some did come, but the different cities that sent telegrams. So this is telegrams from 1959 from different Only Young chapters throughout the U.S., including a letter from the Council of Churches. So he kept all these documents, interior, exterior photographs. This is my Aunt Ruthie in the beautiful Only Young in 1963. And this is also from the interior of the building, the 1970s. So my father kept a lot of the materials and just sort of compiled it all. And I've just been trying to put it all together, including my grandfather's restaurant that was on 6th Street. But so in the 50s, documents that my father kept, any information that appeared about any Chinese person, who lived in Pittsburgh. But so this is an article from 1959. And then I love this picture about the gambling in Chinatown that happened in the 50s. So it was a scrapbook of materials that my father kept about every Chinese person in Pittsburgh, and then working at the Chinatown Inn, and this is from 1959. And he identifies everybody in the back who's in the photograph, and so that's helpful.
I just want to give some context for how the film came into being, because when I first met Shirley, this was a completely chance encounter. We had been in touch because I had been doing some research into the Chinese section of Homewood Cemetery. I lived really close to the cemetery and noticed that there are these very old gravestones. And it turned out that this was a site where a lot of the early Chinese migrants were buried. I noticed a lot of last names on the gravestones that had the surname Yi. And I did a little bit of digging around and I found her father's story. And I was really curious if he had any descendants who were still living in the region. And reading the obituary, I saw that there was a daughter named Shirley living in Mount Lebanon. So quite randomly, I just decided to Google, Shirley Yi and see who I could come up with in Pittsburgh. And lo and behold, I find that there's a Shirley Yi teaching at Carnegie Mellon University, where I was actually studying for my Master's of Fine Art at the time. And I emailed Shirley out of the blue being like, hey, is this your father? And she responded, I think within the same day, and was like, yes, this is my father. He was the
Wait,
last mayor
Lena.
of Chinatown. I have and sorry, did someone say something?
Yes, it's okay. Finish your sentence. It's Nan, but finish your sentence.
Yeah. And I basically came to be acquainted with Shirley and got to visit her home and see all of this amazing material in person. And we decided that one way to bring this, story to more public attention was to have Shirley do a walking tour of Chinatown, which had just been recognized with a historical marker after like a decade of advocacy from the Organization of Chinese Americans and other community members. And when she did this walking tour, I mean, the turnout was incredible. It was a rainy day. I don't know what we expected, but 100 people came out to follow Shirley around about 2 blocks, 2 very modest blocks of downtown Pittsburgh. And I think kind of like from there, we just realized there's this huge demand, huge public curiosity, both from people who do have a personal connection to the story and similar stories, as well as people who just lived in Pittsburgh, and wanted to know more. And so that was astounding to see all that public interest. And I think that really, motivated us to get together a team of folks who could work on, sharing a very, very, very small percent of this massive archive of material. And so we're going to have a little bit more of a chance to discuss later with Shirley over the Q&A, what's next for the archive.
Wait,
now
Lena, can I ask you, how
can we
did you?
just save? Sorry, can we
Sorry.
just save the question for the
Yes.
Q&A? Yeah. we're going to-
Sorry.
And so I wanted to introduce Professor Lok Su, who will give a little bit of context for the digital humanities class that she started this year in the Ethnic Studies Department at UC Berkeley. I had the pleasure of taking a graduate seminar with Lok last semester, and it was a wonderful experience. And I'm so amazed by all the incredible things that this woman does. But this project, I think, is a particularly good example of how education can be more than an authority figure telling a younger person, what history consists of, that this is a really example of how students and young people can be empowered to be part of that process of documenting history themselves. So yeah, without further ado, take it away, Lon.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you so much for inviting me and my students to present what we've done so far this semester. I'll just say that this is the first time that I taught a course like this, and it was really a learning experience for me as well it is for my students. And we started with, just reading up a little bit about Chinatown, of San Francisco Chinatown, and began to lay out sort of the main questions and themes that we were interested in. And I think, this class came at a moment where, there's a lot more curiosity and interest in Chinatown. And Chinatown's actually all over the United States. I'll just say that, part of it is my coming to this project is that I realized that there's very little written, on San Francisco's Chinatown. And San Francisco's Chinatown is the oldest Chinatown in San Francisco and one of the biggest as well in terms of population. Following that is New York's, of course, Chinatown. And I think New York and San Francisco are sort of competing, for some of the biggest. And of course, There are also, sprouting Chinatowns everywhere now, even in the suburbs, especially since after the 1960s. There's also been, of course, post-COVID, there's a lot of transitions happening in Chinatown once again. There's a generational shift, as well as really intensified gentrification, of Chinatowns all over, the nation. And so we see this movement for recuperation, for recovery, of Chinatowns everywhere in the United States. I know that there are a number of digital humanities projects that are popping up or have popped up in the recent past. There's one in San Francisco, there's one in LA that is on the way. And, and then there is our modest project, a class project. But I think our students have done an incredible job in doing the research around it. I gave them a little bit of context, access to certain archives that we had in the ethnic studies library, and we're continuing to get archives, from people in the community as well. So we just acquired 2 additional archives so that we can preserve them and digitize them. And then the students were sent out. We created 5 groups. There were 22 students, 5 groups focusing on 5 different issues, and they went out. They, really sort of took on the project, interviewed people, and did archival research, collected information. So let me go ahead and share with you what we have done in terms of the website, and then I'll turn it over to my 2 students. I hope they are here. Harrington is here. Ava, if you're here, let us know in chat so we can, I guess, highlight you once we're done with that. So this is the website that we created. And I'll have to say that a group of our students actually did the programming, or, 3 students did the programming to set up the format of this site. So there are different pages, here, just to scroll down the main page. This is a sort of scrolling carousel of pictures of the different themes. And it takes about 5 seconds to scroll through. And maybe it might be frozen as well because of the memory issues for the sites. Here are the 5 different main themes in different sort of sections: culture, education, housing, public health, and public spaces. And in each of these, we have a major site that we looked at as an anchoring site. Here, this is the community college in San Francisco's Chinatown. It took 17 years of advocacy and community organizing to get this constructed. It was a long battle to do this. And there's a video actually called Block by Block that documents the struggle. And then we also have different themes, auxiliary themes: Chinese for Affirmative Action, which is an organization, the Lau v. Nichols court case, and then the model minority myth, public health. The anchoring site for this was the Chinese hospital that was constructed, at the end of the 19th century, and has, of course, gone through remodeling and expansion, and then also themes here, smaller themes around public health. We also have one on housing, starting with the anchoring site would be International the I Hotel in Manila Town, which is just the bordering Chinatown at the moment, or previously in the 1960s, 1800s, 1900s and onward, I should say. And then other public housing in San Francisco's Chinatown. And we have the section on arts and culture with the anchoring site of the Kubla Khan nightclub and other, the Forbidden City, which is another nightclub. We have the Kearney Street Workshop, which is a community-based artist organization that was formed mid-century, 1900s, 1950s, 60s. The Golden Dragon Massacre, which is a huge massacre that really changed the way in which people saw Chinatown and interacted with the main space. And finally, the last theme on public space. The anchoring site is Portsmouth Square, and then other public space, public use areas like the Willy Wong Playground, the Alleyways program, the Waheyun Park also. So these are the different themes that we had, and I welcome you to please go ahead and scroll through it yourself. It's a very rich, what I think is really rich. It's a 15-week semester long project, and it's amazing how much the students were able to curate in the process, to collect, to write up, and to produce this amazing set of materials. There's also an interactive map that we created. And, you can click on each of these spaces to find out a little bit more. Some of them have links to our web pages as well. The pages that we have created here. And then there's a directory, a beginning of a directory, I should say. Again, this is what, given the limited time, we were only able to put in what we could. But I'm just impressed on the number of organizations that we're able to capture, here in this map, and you can zoom in and zoom out. So, and again, this is what we've been able to do. And we're hoping to add on, through the years as well. And let me just get out of here. And then I'm going to turn it over and have one of our students, I know Harrington is in the Zoom room, so I'm going to turn it over to him so he can speak about his particular project on culture. So, Harrington?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, great.
Okay. Yeah. So hi everyone, I'm Harrington, a senior at UC Berkeley. I was part of the project Radical History of San Francisco Chinatown with Professor Seo. And the group I was involved is called Culture, just simply the name Culture. It may sound like a catch-all, like a big theme. We actually kind of bothered to come up with a better term, but we still ended up with this term because all the groups from which we brought out the history are all, very indeed, representative of the cultural outline of Chinatown. So our group focuses on multiple sites. Some are still very alive today. So first, we dug deeper into the nightclub and brought with a food called chop suey, a Chinese American food invented by Forbidden City, a nightclub opened in 1938. So chop suey, its invention and popularity are thanks to the prosperity of nightclubs in San Francisco Chinatown at that point, especially in the 1940s and later through World War II and even beyond till 1960s. So in addition to Forbidden City, we also focused on another nightclub called Kubla Khan, which operated from 1944 to 1950, 6 years, relatively short-lived. I think it's conclusive to say that the early nightclubs like Forbidden City, opening before the 1940s, brought Chinese American cuisine to the table. And the later nightclubs like Kubla Khan, opening basically after World War II, helped reinforce the conception of Chinese American cuisine and redefine the experience of eating in Chinatown. And also, changed the pre-existing perception that Chinatown's cuisine was seen as like a foreign and unusual to the American public. So, yeah, so the invention of chop suey in particular and other dishes as such really successfully got the attention of the clients from outside Chinatown and American public in general. And second, Grand Avenue Follies. It is a group of dancers also based in Chinatown, and they were originally composed of 4 dancers around 1940s who actually just followed doctor's suggestion to do exercise and physical activities. But it ended up being like a magic to ignite San Francisco's golden age of nightclubs in Chinatown that, thrived through the World War II era. So basically, they danced in many nightclubs at that time, in multiple dance forms like tap dance, cabaret, etc. And now the Follies are a very robust group of women who perform all over the world, from Cuba to Shanghai, and also, to their hometown, San Francisco here. And third one is Kearney Street Workshop. It is the oldest Asian Pacific American multidisciplinary arts organization in this country. And as a nonprofit organization founded in 1972, during the peak of the Asian American cultural movement, obviously it is deeply tied to the history of Asian American social and political movements. And in fact, its origins are really, really linked with specifically the fight to save the International Hotel, which fought for the rights of elderly, Asian tenants, mostly Filipino and Chinese. And that's why we want to highlight this group. And the artists affiliated with Kearney Street Workshop documented their experiences and helped disseminate information about protests via, well-designed posters and newsletters. And they also taught classes to individuals like Chinatown residents who were brought together, under the common purpose to use their art to serve their community. And today, Kearney Street Workshop continues to provide a platform for Asian and Pacific Islander artists to show their work and foster a network through classes, multiple forms. And they also have launched thousands of artists over time, like Ali Wong in particular, a stand-up comedian. So lastly, my focus is the Golden Dragon Massacre. So it has happened on September the 4th, 1977, in the Golden Dragon restaurant. And unfortunately, all 5 victims are innocent bystanders. And the motive for that mass shooting is very, very complicated because it involved many entanglements, between gangs. They had always been having disputes over, like firecrackers and some other business going on, and definitely also in part relevant to some romantic relationships. And based on the news report and some editorials I found in the library, I think identity crisis and unemployment are the root cause of their involvement with gang activities. And many gang members are young people who either just came to the US or some people who had been involved with gangs back in Hong Kong before coming here. So after this incident occurred, FBI was involved, and also the community took collaborative effort to stem gang activities as well. For example, Chinatown Youth Center morphed into a citywide program that serves clients beyond the Chinatown borders with a major emphasis on prevention. And Chinatown Community Development Center focused on affordable housing for low-income families and newcomers in particular. And so today, these collaborative works are still there. The Chinatown Youth Center, for example, is still running. And the gang activities in Chinatown have been very dormant, but there's an increase in white-collar, crime citywide as well. So, but the success of collaborative and communal efforts made by the Chinatown community here is a great reference for addressing issues, broadly speaking. So basically, that's pretty much about my group's work throughout the semester. And we conducted many interviews, and we also immersed ourselves in piles of archives in Ethnic Studies Library at Berkeley. So I would say, looking back, that's really a unique and rewarding experience, but also might be hopefully a good starting point for the future, preserving and digitizing history of Chinatown, not only limited to the one in San Francisco, but also for the other Chinatowns around the world, especially for some, endangered Chinatowns, as far as I know, like Seattle and Philadelphia. Yeah, that's pretty much about it. Thanks.
Thank you, Harrington. And I just want to see if Ava Olson is here. Oh, great. Okay, so if we can highlight Ava, I'm going to let her present as well.
Hi. Okay, so my name is Ava Gihama. I just graduated from Berkeley. I use they, them pronouns, and my group looked at housing in San Francisco's Chinatown, with the International Hotel being our anchoring site. As you may know, there is a huge housing crisis in the San Francisco Bay Area right now, particularly affordable housing. Gentrification has really skyrocketed in the recent decade or so, but it's definitely not a new process at all. And that's really evident in the history of Chinatown in San Francisco. So for some background, the International Hotel is one of few low-income housing centers where Asian elders were able to live. Because it was difficult for Asian Americans to live outside of Chinatown for much of San Francisco's history, affordable housing sites like this were incredibly important to the community. The hotel was initially built in the late 19th century, but it was destroyed in the San Francisco earthquake in the early 20th century, and then it was rebuilt. It was primarily occupied by Asian American bachelors, particularly Filipino and Chinese men of the Manong generation. Manong is Tagalog for older brother, and it comes from the Spanish word hermano. But this referred to men who had immigrated to the US to send money back home and usually alternated between seasonal agriculture work in the California Central Valley and oyster shucking or similar industrial work somewhere along the coast. But the International Hotel wasn't just a site of affordable housing, it was also a community space. So on the street level, there were restaurants, a club, the Kearney Street Workshop, as Harrington mentioned, and a community bookstore that would later become Eastwind Books in Berkeley. So in the 1970s, the residents of the hotel were put into this really tedious position as the hotel was targeted by people who were looking to develop the area into part of the growing financial district. Most of Manilatown was centered in the International Hotel, and it was functionally destroyed and is no longer a neighborhood that exists after the hotel was destroyed. So in 1974, the tenants of the hotel were forcibly evicted. Or not 1974, sorry, 1977. The tenants of the hotel were forcibly evicted, and there was this really profound amount of police violence over this night, where residents were dragged out of the building, doors were broken down. This particular incident was what made me interested in my sub-focus for this project, which was community safety. I've always been really interested in how the Asian American community interacts with the police because there is a legacy of police violence, but also Asian Americans do benefit a lot from anti-Blackness. And there's a lot of anti-Blackness in the Asian community that can create pro-police rhetoric in our spaces, despite the histories that we share of exploitation and violence by these white structures. But for this project, I think that I really enjoyed the chance to get into the Ethnic Studies Library archives. We looked a lot at KDP newspapers, which are Katipunan Democratic Party newspapers, which is a Filipino youth group. I did a lot of advocacy for the International Hotel. And it was really interesting to kind of see how many of the issues that are, facing Asian Americans here and back home then are really overlapping with the kind of issues that we face today. And so there are these like ongoing legacies of imperialism back home that kind of manifest in state violence here. And so I guess I don't know if I like enjoyed it necessarily, but it was really interesting and meaningful work to be able to see how these issues persist. And like I understand that our ancestors, even our recent ancestors, have been like fighting these issues all the same that we have. And so, yeah, that was what the project was like for me. And I can pass it back to Professor Su now.
Thank you. Let me just stop sharing. The link, I believe, is on chat, but I will also send it. I'll leave it there as well. And I think we'll just conclude it and hopefully have a discussion with everyone who's here. I'm sure many people have many questions, and let me just turn it over to Lena.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ava and Locke and Harrington. Had the pleasure of seeing this project also presented several times in different stages in its iteration, and to see like this final product, it's amazing because it's been just a few months, basically a semester long project, has resulted in this, incredible work. And from my understanding, this is also just the beginning, and that, future classes will be potentially adding to this. So maybe that's a good way to start. I'd love to talk for a moment about what is the future for each of these respective projects, with Shirley's archive and also with the digital humanities work. Maybe Shirley, you can start talking about what's going to happen next with you.
Well, I'm happy that I've made a connection with the Heinz History Center, and they are definitely interested in receiving all my stuff. I read them passages from my father's stories and showed them photographs of some of the 3D items. And they'll actually come and pick it up too, and just add it to their Chinese collection. And hopefully some of the stuff will be part of in the display that I think will be larger than it is currently. So, because I've got a lot of stuff and happy to find a home for it. So happy to share.
Yeah, I will say that one of my big goals, making this film work with Shirley, was to allow more people to find out about this archive. Pittsburgh's Chinatown is a lesser known history for sure. And there is still very much a need to preserve it. You know, a lot of the older folks who have that personal experience of like living there, you know, and knowing what it was like, they're they're getting older. They're going to potentially pass away. So I think it's important for this work to be happening right now at a moment when there is this renewed interest. I was also in touch with the Heinz History Center at a very, very early stage in my research before I ever met Shirley. And now that, you know, they're interested in acquiring her archive, and, you know, I've been talking to them also about screening the film and doing, you know, a public program around Chinatown. It feels like so much has changed, even in just the 2 years that I've been immersed in this research. And I mean, I no longer live in Pittsburgh. I live back in California now, where I'm from. But it's just incredibly gratifying to see that people do really care. And this actually makes a huge difference, right? Because Shirley is just this rogue archivist with her home full of stuff. But if someone can access this material at the Heinz History Center, that makes a world of difference in terms of also scholars getting their hands on that material and doing further research. Yeah. Okay, Locke, what about your project? Where do you see this going next?
Well, this is sort of a larger project. I mean, this is one component that it's the beginning of the base, for filling out future histories that we'll be doing. I'm going to run this class at least a few years and then hopefully hand it over to a nonprofit organization for them to upkeep, So we worked with a number of organizations to do this project, and a number of community members. I think that's really crucial to get people to join in this larger effort. Even the interviews, we basically, because of the contacts we had in the community, we were able to get access, like introductions, to other members of the community. And I think given so much of the experience by Chinese Americans, there's a lot of trauma, a lot of healing that needs to be done. And having that introduction and mediation between, trusted members of the community and the class really helped us to get access, to a broader range of people that have been involved, in Chinatown's history. That's really helpful. We are also at the center, the Asian American Research Center, we are creating an oral histories project. And it is a collaboration between Chinese for Affirmative Action organization and, and the campus, UC Berkeley, in creating oral history, starting to document people, who were extremely active in the 60s, who are now in their 80s, who are now in the 80s, retired. And, we're really wanting to capture the social movements that happened in the 60s that really transformed San Francisco's Chinatown. And so we want to capture that history and document that history. And we're starting with, as much as we can, the histories of that generation, and then hopefully, continue to grow the oral histories. But, we just need to start somewhere, and starting with this organization, they help us identify the members, the groups, the people who were involved and get us access connected. And then, we're launching that now. And we're also thinking of creating like media short films, such as Block by Block, which is a short film that I collaborated also with CAA, Chinese for Affirmative Action, to begin doing. And so we don't know where things will flow at all. It depends on the funding. It depends on getting volunteers and getting people who are interested to continue these projects. But that is the goal. That's the aspiration. Anyways, but I'd love to hear from Harrington and Ava, if what their plans might be, or what they have in mind in terms of what could be the future of this project, and others as well.
I think that for me, I'm really interested in just looking at, I guess looking towards solutions. I think looking a little bit less historically, or not less historically, but looking more at what is going on now, and how using the past as a sort of reference for what we can do. I think that it's just a thing when you're looking at these kind of histories, not of despair necessarily, but definitely of challenges. It's really easy to get to a place where you're it's this overload of information, and then it's okay, well, what am I supposed to do with this? And I think that working with community organizations to talk about what they're doing helps, I guess, alleviate any sort of hopelessness that can come with looking at these really difficult histories.
Harrington, are you out there? Do you want to chime in?
Well, I think, for me, I just think just do it as soon as possible, because as Lena and Siu, you both mentioned, people are getting older and potentially passing away. So actually, from my part, while doing this research, I actually encountered those issues. Some people just can't be able to providing informations, but rather than just keeping those information in their mind. I mean, they're passionate to share their information, but they're just not really physically able to. So kind of sad. But I think that's a really great project to continue and do as soon as possible. Yeah.
That's a good segue also to a question I see from Phoebe in the chat. Any lessons or words of wisdom for AAPI communities wanting to document, recover, and uncover their histories in their particular region? And I think this is a question for all of us, because it sounds like we did different types of research as well, especially since the San Francisco project involved a lot of original research, right? Doing oral histories interviews that didn't exist before. Whereas for me and Shirley, it's more about working with her father's memoir, which is unpublished, and working with what we have, but which hasn't been publicized yet. So, does anyone want to chime in?
Shirley, would you?
Well,
Lena,
I think it's important to certainly capture it all and save it and share it before time runs out. So that's my goal right now, and that's what I intend to do this summer, to gather it all up and turn it over to the Heinz History Center. So kind of perfect timing, everything. So
Shirley, for those of us who arrived, let's say, post 1990 and do not have the same deep roots you do, where would we get started if we wanted to, do guide research on this?
about Pittsburgh history?
Or anywhere we are, right? How would we even know that there was a Chinatown there?
Well, to first go there, and
Right.
you'll
Of course, right?
Yeah, so you'll see that it is really just a single building on 3rd Avenue, but the research can begin at the Heinz History Center in the historic Pittsburgh site, where Lena, you got some of those photos from, right? That site. So yeah, so that's a good place to start.
So I
And-
am from, let's say, Kentucky, right? How do I find out if there were Chinese people there in the decades, let's say, before my family immigrated?
Oh, you're from Lexington, Kentucky?
Yes.
Wow. Okay. I lived in Lexington for 2 years.
Let's
Teaching
talk about that later. It is a beautiful
teaching
state.
at the University of Kentucky. And yeah, I felt that I was the only Chinese person in the whole state of Kentucky at the time. Yeah, so
There were two of us, surely.
and so I don't think there was any other Chinese people in Lexington at the time. But I
Well,
think
in
maybe
terms of like immigration waves, right? I was talking about the like UK actually has, like, I grew up in graduate housing, which was mostly Chinese people, graduate students, right? Because they're the post Tiananmen H-1B visa crowd. So how do I, like, if had I at 14 in Kentucky had the knowledge that students can also create knowledge, right? And I wanted to research whether, there were these preceding waves, right? Before the academia Chinese kind of hijacked the narrative, like, where would I begin?
I think the university. That's where you begin.
Okay.
Yeah. I believe that there would be a history of Asian faculty teaching there, probably starting in the 70s, maybe 60s. Or the University of Louisville in, yeah, and I bet you'll be able to find some history. But I did on a tour once to Berea College.
Oh yeah, Berea College, yes.
Yeah, I was mistaken for an international student. So I don't think they have many Chinese students there, but they I'm sure now there are. So yeah, I think
Right.
yeah.
Right. It's just these yeah, I think it was in my teens when I realized my parents did not invent immigration. And I'm just fascinated by the Chinese Americans who have these deep, deep roots, right? Because I would say, like, as a community, right, Chinese America is kind of fragmented along these lines, right? And I think that does a huge disservice to, let's say, the spawn like me, right?
Mm-hmm. But
And it's like,
hey,
how do we get
research.
these stories?
Yeah, you'll
how do we
find
get
it.
these stories into, like, the curriculum? How do we unerase ourselves?
Yeah, just keep digging. You'll find it. Well,
Yes.
just by chance, by like Lena in the cemetery and researching and finding.
Yeah, that was my other question. Lena, you're I can't hear Lena because she's muted, but yeah, I just wanted to ask her, like, what strain of intellectual curiosity, right, like, prompted that? Because that A sounds very on brand for Lena, and B, like, that's so cool.
I think one of the things that I didn't realize until about a year into the pandemic, a year into living in Pittsburgh for my MFA program, is that this city I had kind of written off as an extremely white city that
Right,
had
because
no
you're at
connection,
CMU. Okay.
was actually quite related to things I'd been curious about in terms of what brought my own ancestors to the States. When I was researching the grave site where the early migrants were buried, I learned that the majority of them had come from Taiping and Toishan, which is where
Mhm.
my ancestors are from.
Mhm.
Many of them ended up in Pittsburgh on job contracts, temporary job contracts, and had first landed in the Bay Area and then traveled by train to
Wow.
Pittsburgh and work, not in the steel industry directly necessarily, but in a lot of related kind of like support industries like the laundries that Shirley mentioned, restaurants. And there's like this thriving Chinese community that, unlike the history of San Francisco Chinatown, that's, you know, more continuous,
Mhm.
Pittsburgh's Chinese history is really broken up by these immigration waves. And a lot of those that first settled there, they didn't end up staying and
Right.
establishing themselves for the long term. Although there are some families, you know, like Shirley's that did. But it was that realization that, you know, I was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not a
And
place
was
I'd
this anything, was
necessarily.
this related to what you were getting your master's in?
I did a number of different projects when I was doing my MFA at SAMU, and I will
Oh, yeah,
say
right, right.
this was
Your MFA. Okay.
that I didn't get a chance to wrap up during my time there.
Cool.
And then, you know, I found a way to make this work with Shirley, and it's tied up some loose ends for me. You know, I think also me and Shirley found a kind of kinship in one another because Shirley had gone to art school in the Bay Area where I was born, and then moved back to Pittsburgh. And I was born in the Bay Area and went to Pittsburgh to go to art school. So I think it was very serendipitous. And these
Yeah.
types of
And
things, like, the initial encounter wasn't about we're going to make art together, we're going to make a project together that a lot of people are going to see, or that the Heinz History Center is going to acquire. I think it really came out of this like deep curiosity about our own family's histories and a desire to make sense of that in, you know, the 2020s when
right,
everything like
right.
feels so hot. The
Mhm.
xenophobia and the anti-Asian rhetoric that's happening right now, you know, this is not the first time that it's occurred in American history, right? And
Mhm.
there's these parallels between what's happened to our ancestors as well. And at the same time that there's all this tragedy and despair that Ava mentioned, there's also a great deal of hope and a great deal of resurgence of interest in this history. And it's super inspiring to me that, you know, the people who presented today, we represent different generations. You know, we are at different points in our lives. And I think having that continued intergenerational dialogue and interest and collaboration is so crucial to ensuring that this history isn't lost, right? Um, so I think one of the, like, if I were to give someone a piece of advice answering the question from Phoebe that kind of got lost, it would be to seek out those intergenerational collaborations, actually, and to find ways, you know, to tell these stories across time and place. And, you know, to think that Shirley might have been in school, you know, when my parents were living here in San Francisco. I mean, it's just crazy to think
Right,
about all those different connections.
right.
And that's because that's really what makes this work possible, that you feel a personal pull to do the work. This is not the type of work that, you know, gets us rich.
I have another connection too that I want to offer to Ava. I was actually in San Francisco in 1977 when the International Hotel people were being evicted. And I believe I still have my Super 8 footage that I shot of that time, of when that was happening. So I'd be happy to look for it and send it on to you if I can find it.
That would be so wonderful, Shirley. And, you know, we have the Ethnic Studies Library that will take care of these archives. And so if you would be willing to do that, we'd be so excited to house it, you know, and to take care of it. And to make sure that it's accessible. You know, we'll digitize it and make it accessible to people.
Yeah, I think it's in my collection of Super 8 films.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I mean, the only other things I wanted to add, you know, was there are actually, you know, Chinese communities where they're formed they usually create organizations, civic organizations, the ones that appear in the documentary. But in all the different Chinatowns, they have their own set that are formed, in different periods in time. So like even going to those as a starting point, not as an end point, but as a starting point, to do that alongside all the public documents that I think we mentioned in chat, newspaper archives, you can get access to that nowadays digitally. Census materials, like birth records, death records, marriage like records. You can see the names listed, and you can sort of do the genealogical work that I think Lena had done, to search out Shirley. I think those are the ways that they're entry points into retrieving those histories.
I wanted to just close with one last question for everyone. I kind of answered this question myself already, but I'm just really curious, what was the most personally meaningful aspect of doing this work for each of you? And yeah, that's it. Just curious about that.
Do the students want to chime in? Harrington, Ava?
I think for me, I have family members who were like part of the Monong generation. And I have I like grew up, I guess hearing kind of stories about the International Hotel and like what it was like to kind of have that as a community space and then lose that. And so being able to, I guess, play been a little bit of a role in not letting that history go missing was very meaningful to me.
For me, I think it's my first time actually, technically speaking, doing interviews for like a class. So that's really good practice, especially, I kind of, want to do some, more journalistic works in the future. So that's really rewarding. And except for that, I think while doing the interviews, interacting physically with those interviewees, I just feel like some interviewees, especially for some elderly people, they thought we young people just don't really care what the old history looks like. So, they are willing to share, they're eager to share the information around, but they just don't really know where to share. So I think we should give them kind of like a space and access to speak out. So yeah, that's pretty something that, one more takeaway. Yeah.
So for me, I grew up in LA's Chinatown. So this, San Francisco is sort of my second home in some ways, or Oakland. Chinatown is my second home now that I've been here in Berkeley. And I think it's a place that I've connected with tremendously, especially through my mentors. I came here as an undergraduate in Berkeley. And so one of my mentors, Ling Chi Wong, had been very active in San Francisco's Chinatown. And now that I'm here in this incredible space, I can do something, if I'm not there in LA, at least I can do something in San Francisco to document, retrieve, and recover the San Francisco's Chinatown first. And then I think, Oakland's Chinatown, I'm making connections with them to see if we can also begin community campus projects with them, because that's also a very rich history. And, personally, my work is on Chinese diaspora in Latin America, Panama, worked on Cuba and now Peru. But in all those Chinatowns, they reference San Francisco. There are San Francisco Chinese who have moved to other places in the diaspora. And so like over and over, I just kind of hear reverberations and know, and through the histories and even today, San Francisco is such an important, space for Chinese American history more generally. And I would say Chinese diaspora history globally. And, it has such an incredibly rich history and the politics that happened in San Francisco, the battles that were fought in San Francisco, had reverberations all over the country and all over the world. And so, for me, it was really, it's about documenting Chinese American history. This is a start. A start is with San Francisco's Chinatown, and to eventually, hopefully, link, the different Chinatowns all over the U.S. and Latin America. I think that is the larger goal, perhaps, in my lifetime. I'm not talking about a few years. It really will take a lot of work, but it's important to have this history for Chinese Americans, for Asian Americans, to know that the histories of racism and discrimination are deep rooted, but it's also that our communities have been resilient. We have been fighting, struggling, and contesting all of this. And I don't want that to get lost. I want to make sure that, this is passed on to future generations.
Shirley, do you want to share any final words?
Just happy to participate in this, Lena, and just great to share all this history.
Thank you so much. I just wanted to note that for the folk who are in Pittsburgh, we'll be doing an in-screening film showing in August, on August 12th at the Pump House with Rivers of Steel over in Munhall. So please stay tuned for information about that, as well as our event at the Heinz History Center. I am really happy to be able to share both of these projects with the public and to have all these amazing people in the same virtual space with me. And just, thank you to all of you for your amazing work. I know that this is just the beginning in many ways. So I'm excited to see what the next year brings for all of us. And thank you all of you for joining us, and to APIC for making this event possible.
Thank you all so much. This was fascinating.
Yes, thank you, Locke and Shirley for sharing your father's story, Locke for doing all this work with your students, Lena for producing this film. It was so nice to see. I always love seeing the archival work turn into something that lives beyond, right, the archives. So it's really important work that you're doing. I feel like, especially it's API Heritage Month too here. So it's really great that we're documenting all of this. You're making sure these stories live on beyond. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But yes, if anyone, I just wanted to plug the festival again. If anyone is interested in seeing more API events happening this month through June, we have our festival just shortly. If you're in San Francisco, we're having the closing reception of Jade Wave Rising, which celebrates AAPI women's power. It's an exhibition at Silmar's Cultural Center. Her doors are opening at 1, but we are having a poetry reading and a screening actually of Manila Town Manang, which continues on some of these stories. It's about the life and activism of Janet Gandiongo Lazam, who was one of the last people to leave the I-Hotel and was a tenants' rights activist. She will be here in person along with some of the people who produced the film, and we're going to have a panel discussion as well. So if you're in the city, you want to come stop by and hear some more Chinatown stories and stories of activism, please come by. Otherwise, check out our festival. We'd love to see you online and in person. So thank you, Lena.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.